Well, welcome back to the show. And for those of you that have been with us maybe from the beginning, you might know that to up until this point, the show has been categorized as the Threshold Lab. And recently we went through a little bit of a rebrand. And now this is actually going to be the first conversation that I'm having with a guest on the show under the new rebrand of the Win More, Live Better podcast. And I was really excited to bring to you today's guest, Jack Mullaney, and I'm going to tell a little bit about where our roots, where our paths have kind of collided. We got a chance. I was going through the phone and looking at those initial messages because I think time starts to blur together. But we had a chance to connect and meet for the first time right before the COVID pandemic, actually going back to early 2020, before the world got kind of turned upside down. And ever since, I've just kind of kept a lot of tabs on what Jack was doing in the running world and where he's coaching and things like that. Because I think from my very first interaction with you, Jack, I was really struck, I think, by your curiosity and the nuance and depth through which you were talking about and listening, asking questions around things like mindset and mentality and the mental side of performance. And then again, that's kind of, I think, launched into some other conversations on leadership and coaching and so on. But anyway, all that to say, I was just super excited. You've been on the radar for a while to have this conversation. So I'm super appreciative of you taking some time.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and I feel like I've gotten so much from the episodes of the Threshold Lab, and just hoping I can contribute something that might be of value today.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind of that. And I think I know so the other distinction that you now will have for this show, not only being the first guest for this new rebrand of the Win More Live Better podcast, but also you're our first running coach that we've had on the show. And so with that, I could see there are a number of people maybe listening who have their own maybe interpretation of what being a running coach entails, and some of that may align with the demands and challenges and nuances of other sports, but I could also see there being maybe some unique differences. So for you, where I'd maybe like to start is when you think about being a professional running coach, what might be unique demands, nuances that go into that, or surprises even that maybe other people that are unfamiliar with it wouldn't expect?
It's a really good question because I think part of my coaching journey has been around finding the parallels between our sport and others. I feel like it's a really um, great opportunity to try to learn from other sports and other coaches. And I think a lot of some of my best learnings as a coach have come outside the sport. But at the same time, there are definitely some nuances and differences that are pretty running specific. I think the first one that jumps out at me is that we have a team of 11 athletes on our team up at HOKA NAZ Elite in Flagstaff, and each of those 11 athletes has different racing schedules. So whereas a team sport coach might be used to having the team all practice together, all compete together, and it's very much all about the collective. We have a little bit of a different situation where each athlete has their own individual racing schedule. However, we are trying to still create overlap in training so that there's still a benefit to having training partners and people that you can go through this experience with. So I think that's always kind of an alchemy that I'm trying to strike as a coach is serving the individual and their individual needs in training, but also doing it in such a way that we're still benefiting from the collective and kind of have a still a collective mentality. So that's one. I think the other probably primary difference, although there are some parallels to a sport like college football. I know since we're kind of bowl season is upon us at the moment, where the amount that you practice or prepare is very high in comparison to the amount that you actually compete or race. Some of our athletes who run the marathon are probably only racing 6 to 10 times per year, but training year round, 365 days a year with not a whole lot in the way of rest or recovery. So those might be some differences where you really have to lean into the practice and training environment and really prioritize that as a coach because that's really what's going to lead to the results that you have.
Maybe diving into what that looks like in essence is like, let's say I were to shadow you for a month, we'll say, could you give us kind of a little bit of an overview of what might be some of the things that we see go into being, again, a running coach at the highest level for you, and again, some of those nuances that go into that?
Sure. I think for me personally, it's probably easiest to start with the values that I have, because those really dictate the environment that I want to create at practice every single day. And those are the values of connection, competition, consistency, curiosity, and compassion. So, connection, something that is really important for me, is developing really good communication patterns between myself and the athletes. Um, so much of coaching in running is being able to take feedback from an athlete, and some of that is what they tell you, but also some of that is what you're seeing and noticing, and being able to have a constructive conversation to decide how to proceed in the training session. So much of running, I feel like the training side of it is getting the intensities right and the volumes right, to make sure that the athlete is really preparing specifically for the race that they're trying to get ready for. And I rely so much on the feedback that the athlete is giving me during the session, and also just kind of in conversation, to really be able to make good decisions. So connection is really important. Competition is the second one. Everything that we do is centered around being ready for the competition. So if you were to come to a practice, so much of our sessions are designed to sort of mimic the demands of the race that we're getting ready for. And I really want to make it so that when an athlete gets to the race or gets to a competition, it's not really anything that they haven't experienced before in terms of the physical or mental challenges associated with the race that's in front of them. Consistency is probably the bedrock of success as a distance runner. It's so much about just stacking days of really good execution over and over and over again. And some of our highest performers on our team, that's been the separator. They've just been able to show up every single day and execute the training for the day, recover appropriately, and really live a 24/7 lifestyle of an athlete. I feel like that's super important in our sport. You really cannot get away with 99%. You'll get exposed. I mean, when races are decided by fractions of a second at times, you'll run for 30 minutes and it's down to a second or two. It really does mean that you have to be at 100%. Curiosity is a really big piece of my coaching philosophy. And so we're always trying to ask what our limits are in practice. We're always trying to make sure that we're continuing to kind of question and wonder what if. And then compassion is also a really important value for me. So if you were to come to our practice, you'd see a lot of the athletes on our team supporting each other, working together, giving each other a lot of energy. That's a big thing for me, is that our athletes give each other energy in a variety of different ways. Those are kind of the things I think you'd notice if you came to a practice.
This, I think, speaks to maybe why I thought you'd be a really great guest, because that question, it could easily be woven into what are the, task responsibilities that go into it. And yet you kind of pulled, you took a step back and described those core values that now comprise who you are as a coach, and that your philosophy. Where did you learn that? And at what point maybe did you define those for you?
I think when I first got into coaching, my curiosity has been something that's, I think, been a big strength of mine in terms of getting into coaching. I don't have a professional running background, so I kind of came into the profession with a bit of a chip on my shoulder to learn as much as I could. And so I studied a lot of coaches and coaching. And I remember Steve Kerr talking about meeting Pete Carroll before he became the coach of the Golden State Warriors. And he talks about how Pete asked him, how are you going to coach? And, Steve's initial response was like, hey, like, what offense I'm going to run? Like, what do you mean? And Pete's response was, no, like, what do you stand for? Because what do you value? Because those values are going to create the environment that your athletes are in every single day. You know, other coaches are going to be able to learn the X's and O's side, but what your competitive advantage is going to be is the environment that you create. And I felt like it was so important for me to get clear on what my values were so that I had an understanding of in a practice environment or a training environment that I wanted to create for athletes. I think the other thing that was really big for me in that process was observing other coaches and recognizing that if you find yourself getting too caught up in outcomes, um, that's a good way to kind of take your mind off of what's most important. And I felt like anytime coaches let their egos get in the way too much, it was because they were reacting too much to outcomes. And putting your focus on creating an environment allows you to focus on something that's a lot more in your control, for one. But also, it truly is something that I feel like can be a competitive advantage. So I did an exercise where I tried to get very clear on what my values were. And um, Michael Gervais is he's the host of Finding Mastery podcast, and he's worked with Coach Carroll initially in doing this. And so they had an exercise where you kind of write down all of your values, you narrow them down, and you start to realize which ones are most important to you. And I settled on these five because I felt like they were values that would help athletes become the best runners that they could possibly be. But at the same time, they were also values that were going to help people become good people. And I feel like in a lot of ways, good coaching might be teaching you to perform when the lights are on, but great coaching is teaching you how to live when the lights go out. And some of the best coaches that I ever had were coaches that they didn't just teach you how to win, they also taught you how to live. And I just I've found that with these five values, you know, if you start to think about, okay, if I'm trying to be good at my job and I have an office job, or I'm trying to be a good partner, a good spouse, or a good friend, is connection important? You bet it is. Is competing every day to be the best version of yourself, even when you don't feel great, important? Yeah, you bet. Is consistency important? Showing up every single day? Because it's how people start to trust you when they know how you're going to show up? Oh, yeah. Is curiosity important and not being too judgmental, keeping an open mind? Yeah, it is. And is compassion important? You know, having compassion for other people, compassion for yourself? Yeah, you bet. And so when I started realizing that there were values that translated far beyond sport, in addition to being something that led to success in sport, that's really when I got very firm in what those five values were.
Inevitably, there are going to be moments as a coach where challenges arise. Those values, I'm sure, get pressure tested in their own way. And again, maybe they've also maybe even evolved in their own way. Maybe those values have stayed the same, but even maybe the interpretation of those, I'm sure, can kind of go through its own form of evolution. For you, when you find those values being challenged, threatened, pressure tested, whatever term you want to, are there any of them in particular that you notice yourself coming back to more so than the others that kind of help keep you grounded and again showing up to create the best environment for those you lead?
Absolutely. It would be connection and curiosity. So usually anytime those values are being pressure tested, it's because there's been a breakdown in communication. And so connecting is really important. And then when that connection happens, leading with curiosity, because usually there's been a misunderstanding. And it's really important to lead with that curiosity to figure out, okay, where did we kind of deviate and potentially get on different paths, and how can we come back together? So it's definitely been those two.
What I like about that is, we could ask you, any coach on here, and have them describe their pain points, their problems, all the different things that keep them up at night and things. And there's going to be that list, but then underneath that, there are what are the causes? Like, what are the things that contribute to that? And what I like about what you just described is those problems that arise oftentimes are rooted in lack of communication or a communication breakdown. Like that's the cause. And then okay, boom, we can lean into connection and we can do it from a space of curiosity to kind of fill that. So I like that. That's again going in kind of an added level deeper. This may tie into how you were describing the importance of not only helping athletes succeed in their given sport, but also in life. What have you kind of landed on as your own maybe kind of definition for success as a coach or as a leader?
So I have this analogy that I use with the athletes, and it's one that I got, I don't remember where, I think some podcast many years ago, but it's this idea of heating the room. And the analogy is imagine that you had an ice cube in a room that was 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And every day you could only raise the temperature or the thermostat 1 degree in that room. And your objective was to melt the ice cube. If you showed up on day one, you would raise the temperature 1 degree, the room would be 1 degree Fahrenheit, but you'd still have an ice cube. On day two, you'd come back, do the same thing, it'd be 2 degrees, you'd still have an ice cube. And you'd do this over and over again until day 33, where you'd show up and you'd turn the thermostat up and the ice cube would melt. And I feel like so often in sports, we celebrate that 33rd day. That's the big win in our sport. That's the big breakthrough race. That's the thing that everybody talks about. But that success would not have been possible without the previous 32 days, or, however many days it takes. And what that analogy, I think, really speaks to is providing clarity on what success is. And so often we want to define success by wins and losses, and you'll certainly have people, even people who make decisions about your job in this sport, who will judge you based off of that. But what I found and what I spoke to, I think, at the beginning of this podcast is if that's what you lean into too much, I think it's very hard for the ego to not get in the way and for you to respond negatively when losing happens. What the analogy of heating the room is all about is every single day you got to show up and embody the values that you have. And that's why the values, again, are so important, because I see success as heating the room. In other words, injecting those values into our culture every single day. And that's how I evaluate myself. It's how I structure my days. And if I'm leading with those values, then I kind of have to accept whatever outcome comes of those values. But it takes me a little bit more away from judging myself too much based on those outcomes, because I think any coach knows you'll drive yourself crazy if you get way too caught up in that. And I get that that's what we get paid to do. Don't get me wrong. I just think the way that you go about producing the best possible results is keeping your own focus and the athlete's focus on the values that we have collectively decided are the things that actually lead to the success that we want to have.
I haven't heard that analogy maybe articulated in that particular way. And I love one of the pieces that I enjoy and appreciate about it is the emphasis on setting the temperature for the room, like the environment piece, and that being the input that, in essence, as a coach, you can truly influence and have maybe the most control over. Whereas the output, the outcomes, the results, and things like that, as much as we want those things, as much as we are paid for producing those things, the reality is those are things oftentimes that are a little bit beyond our control or our circle of influence. I like that analogy from that standpoint of the emphasis on the inputs. Where I'd actually want to go for a moment is, maybe branching just a bit from your own coaching career, but that moment that you described of how we love to celebrate the 33rd day and, on day, 10 or 15, 20 or whatever it might be figuratively, where an athlete is putting in the work and they're not seeing the payoff. They're not seeing the breakthrough. They're not having the transformation. Could you maybe walk us through how you approach players and or athletes in those situations, in those moments? And I don't know if there is maybe an example that comes to mind of an athlete that how you kind of help them navigate that plateau, if you will, or that space of I'm not producing the results, although I'm putting in the work.
I think it's a great point because for any athlete, it's not always the 33rd day, right? Sometimes it's the 133rd day or the 533rd day. And so that's where, again, I think it's so important that, if you have these values in your environment, you need to celebrate and call out those values as success. And you need heating the room to be success, not just we celebrate the 33rd day when it happens and that's it. So we have even at the professional level, we have a tradition. Every team meeting that we end it with shout outs. And what those are is an opportunity for anyone on the team to shout out another teammate for something that they've noticed them doing in the past week or month or whatever that that they feel like is that idea of heating the room or leaning into our values, and it's going to lead to success even if it hasn't yet. And so I think that's a really cool space where our athletes could say, hey, I want to shout out Zach. I know he's had some injuries, but every day I come in here, I see him grinding away on the bike, and I just know he's going to have some success in the future. And I feel like that peer support and that peer influence can be so powerful. So that's one way that we do it. I think another way, again, is leaning back into that value of connection. I meet individually with the athletes so much and just continue to reinforce with them that their inputs are right and the outputs are going to come. And we have a couple athletes on the team, one in particular who's had about a year of what I would call world-class inputs. But right before a major race, there's been a sickness that she's picked up, or just like a freak accident injury that she's picked up, and it's prevented her from being able to enjoy the confidence and the kind of the celebration that comes from that 33rd day or that world-class output. But she's just done such a great job of continuing to show up every single day and put those world-class inputs in. And again, I think we just have to create an environment where we celebrate those inputs just as much as we celebrate the outputs.
Your answer to this next one some of that may have been just spoken in how you describe that, but for you, you've been around these elite performers, these elite runners, again at the highest level. And I think any of us, especially all of us that are maybe novice to the running world, maybe some of us go for a jog here and there, myself included, and I'm huffing and puffing after I'm reaching my max heart rate after about 7 minutes. So I'm working on that currently. However, what for you do you feel like becomes the separators for elite runners, not just on the physical side, but from a mental standpoint that enable them not only to be successful, but then also, I think, to sustain that success?
I think the biggest thing is the best runners that I've been around have the mindset of a fireman or the mindset of a heart surgeon, where, sorry, it doesn't matter how you feel today, we're getting the job done. And we're only doing running, which we're not saving lives. Let's be very clear about that. But I think the best athletes that I've been around, they kind of have that mentality where, if you're a heart surgeon, it doesn't matter. If you're tired, if whatever, the job is the job. You got someone whose life is right there on the operating table. If you're a fireman, most people want to run away from that type of a scene. You got to be calm, cool, and collected and go right into that fire and take care of it. And I've found that the best athletes in endurance sport, they just don't have a fear of kind of going to that dark place and seeing how good they can be. And that's reflected in training just as much as it is reflected in the competition. You can tell when you do a hard session, if an athlete is going to be able to kind of withstand maybe the pressure and the chaos that comes in competition because of how laser focused and how hard they're willing to push. So That's uh, that's probably the main separator among all others.
How have you gone about trying to cultivate some of that and or train that? I know some of which can certainly be inherited from an individual level. And also, as you mentioned, when you're creating the heat for the room and shaping that environment, what would it look like for you or your staff to kind of try to create an environment where those things also get trained or cultivated or brought out?
I think it's something that you have to celebrate for sure. So oftentimes after a major workout, I write a weekly email to the team every week, and a lot of times I'll do my own version of shout outs in those. And I'll shout out an athlete, not necessarily for their specific outputs, but for the way that the mentality that they brought to a training session. I'll do that in a race as well, just to make sure that our athletes are understanding that it was the mindset or the approach that was the differentiator. It wasn't just, oh, they ran such and such a time, they're great. What was the input that actually led to that? I think it's really important that you're always kind of reinforcing those things. And I think also an important teaching moment where you always try to remind the athlete. It's one of the reasons why I try to make some of our most specific workouts very similar to the demands of the race that we're going to be in, where you kind of remind the athlete in a workout or in a practice setting, hey, we could show up at the race and it could be 100 degrees, or it could be 30 degrees and windy and raining sideways. And that's what it's doing right now. So let's just get ready for that. And let's practice, kind of being the eye of the hurricane and being calm here in the midst of a storm. Because that could come in a competition setting too. And if it doesn't, shoot, we got even more prepared and it's going to feel easier. So I think not shying away from those challenges. I think sometimes in the distance running community, we have a tendency to want to make the training as easy as possible. And I think there's a space for doing it in such a way that it's sustainable. That's certainly important, and that's a conversation to have. But you definitely need to be able to pick your spots in training and say, hey, on these days, these are the days when we're really trying to execute, we're really trying to get after it because we want to give a physical and a mental adaptation that's going to really prepare you for the competition. And if we never go to that place in practice, it's really hard to go to that place when all of a sudden there's fans screaming, there's other competitors around you. It's very hard to get to that if you've never done it in a more controlled environment.
This isn't a question, it's more of a comment. Just kind of maybe see if this aligns at all for you. Earlier you were talking about the curiosity and the questions that we ask ourselves, both as coaches as well as athletes. You talked about what are our limits, imagining like this what if, of which again, I can have my own interpretation of that, the possibilities. And what I liked about what you just shared is it's a combination, it sounds like, of not only what if in the form of possibilities and pushing ourselves beyond our limits, but also like even if the circumstances aren't ideal, or even if we don't feel great, or even if whatever the case might be, something's not going in our favor, there is also this piece of that shows up that you see, going back to the fireman example, where it's like, hey, even if in this situation, most everybody else is running the opposite way, you're still pushing forward because you know that's the job. And so, again, I don't know if that's terminology at all that you would use, but I like that combination of both the what if and then now taking it a step further, even if, regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, curiosity is such an important value in kind of the realm of training and competition because you are continually asking yourself, okay, how how hard can I go? And I think it's a great antidote for fear. Rather than fearing what the outcome is, you're more interested in the curiosity of how far you can go. I think that's an important piece. I think I relate a lot to consistency. I think what's really important in the heat of competition, whoever wins in a competition is always the person that just deals with the circumstances the best. So let's stop trying to pretend that a 10 out of 10 circumstance is always going to be the case in a competition, because it's not. So it's really more about, the person that wins a race is the person who, if the conditions or the circumstances are a 5 out of 10, they got 5 out of 5. And they really leaned into that. And so I feel like that's maybe the piece that we're trying to lean into and practice a little bit more is, hey, if it's a 6 out of 10 day for you, success is a 6 out of 6. And let's be curious to see how far we can push that. I think it's really easy, especially in the distance running community, where if the conditions aren't perfect because our sport has gotten so tied up in times and how fast someone has been able to go, if the conditions aren't there to be able to run super fast, I think sometimes there's a bit of some athletes that just kind of turns off to the idea of competition. And I'm really interested in trying to decouple that for athletes and really get them a lot more interested in just racing and understanding that, hey, if you just focus on racing, when the conditions are good, the time will be really fast. But if you're racing and the conditions aren't good, well, you can still win. You can still place really well. And that's just as valuable on those days. So yeah, to your point, I think curiosity and then certainly consistency of just trying to show up as best you can every single day, regardless of the circumstances, is really valuable.
And you mentioned fear. That emotion is oftentimes um, used in parallel with like pressure. And I know that there's always everybody's kind of got their own interpretations around both, and I think what I appreciate in like somebody like yourself is I do know that you have an appreciation for language and nuance and how we describe these things, how we articulate these things, how you mentioned celebrating, overcoming these things, and so on. What is your own maybe narrative or language around pressure with those that you lead and how you maybe talk about it, yeah, how you help athletes navigate that? What does that look like for you?
I think it gets back to the language that we use around defining what success is and reinforcing that success inside the building or success internally has a lot more to do with our process. And the process is an adherence to the values that we talk about. And then also, I think it's really important to just get clear with the athletes that the external pressure is going to be there. So it's probably best to just acknowledge the reality of it, but then do everything you can to focus on the internal inputs that we talk about so much. You can't really avoid it. And I tell you what, like in terms of great examples of this, maybe more on the coaching side, but I think about this a lot. I think about the college football. I'm a big college football fan. Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame and Ryan Day at Ohio State last year. Last season, both had games where their fan bases wanted to run them out of town. And if you listen to that pressure, they would have caved. I mean, these are fan bases that are all over social media. They're all over YouTube. There's pundits on ESPN, what have you, talking about, hey, yep, time for those coaches to go. They can't win. Notre Dame lost to like Northern Illinois, right? And it was this big embarrassment. Ohio State lost to their rival up north again, and it was this big thing. You kind of wait it out, and you get to the end of the season, you turn on the national championship game. Who's playing? Ohio State and Notre Dame. And so I just think it's such a testament to, they had to really turn out the noise and focus on what was important. And our sport is far smaller and far less popular around the world, I think, than college football. And I think it's just a great lesson that, hey, if we let the fans coach or determine all this kind of stuff, we'd ride a crazy roller coaster. The only way to achieve success is to get back to the things that we know lead to success. It's lean into, make sure your connections are great. Connect with the coaches, connect with your teammates. Make sure every day you have a practice of pushing yourself to be the best you can be so that it's not a crazy thing when the race comes up. Have a habit of being the same person that shows up every single day from a consistency standpoint so that your attitude and your effort when you show up at a race isn't anything that you would question or not feel confident about. because it's something that you do every single day. Lead with curiosity. Use curiosity to kind of counter the pressure. Instead of saying, like, what if I fail? Start asking, what if I win? How far could I go? And then lastly, have some compassion for yourself. Yeah, you're not going to win every single race that you run. But if you can have some compassion and just understand, hey, there's a huge benefit and a huge reward just for being in the arena. Everyone else that's kind of creating this pressure, they're not doing what you're doing. You know, they're not. And it's so easy to just sit on the couch and say what you want to say. But it's really the value is being in the arena and experiencing what it's like to go through those competitive experiences. And if you can have some gratitude around that rather than maybe resentment for people who aren't in the arena, I think you can combat that. So again, it's just a really big thing around leaning into our environment, our values, and what we feel like is success.
There's an important element of how you describe that where you're redirecting our focus, like redirecting focus to what's important, redirecting focus to what you can control or what you can influence and so on. And I love that. I love that sentiment. Lately, this came up for me. I've shared it in a couple settings, but it came up for me in a conversation I was having with a uh, collegiate soccer coach, and one of the things we were talking about was as a leader, there's this courage involved in terms of you're going to have to make some unpopular decisions. You're going to have to, in essence, be the fireman that's running towards something while everybody else is running that away, and or everybody else is like watching you, waiting for you to go solve it, to go put it out. So one of the things that we talked a little bit about was there's a quote that if you want to lead the orchestra, you have to be willing to turn your back on the crowd. And I love that sentiment and I think that ties into leadership, but I think that ties into your sentiment about being in the arena. There are certainly you're going to be surrounded by skeptics, you're going to be surrounded by people with opinions, and yet can you intentionally shift your focus to being all in on what's in front of you? So as a leader, that's being all in on your people. And then if you're an athlete or performer, it's being all in on your mission, your purpose, and so on. So I like how you describe that. And where I kind of want to come back for a moment, you mentioned Marcus Freeman, Ryan Day. There's that perspective that is important in how we handle pressure, but then to also think about you use consistency earlier as one of your core values and the bedrocks of success and a separator. Again, I don't think that probably extends just to athletes, but also you as a coach. So at this level, coaching at the highest level for you, there's probably always something you can do. There's always something on the to-do list. How do you decide your priorities, what actually is important that deserves your time and your energy when again there's a never-ending to-do list?
I think that's something that I'm continually getting better at this level because I've realized that I think as a coach, that might be the biggest competitive advantage you can gain is to have a schedule that truly aligns with your values and your priorities. And so the way that I think about it is I want every day to be a day where I go on offense. And what I mean by that is every night before I go to bed, I have a notebook where I set my priorities for the next day. And the top priorities, I'm kind of a checklist type of guy. I kind of get into that. And so I'll create a checklist for myself of top priorities that revolve around reinforcing the values that I have. So oftentimes at the top of that list are I got to meet with an athlete, connection. It's a practice plan for the next day. What messaging am I going to send to the athletes about how this is preparing them for competition? Consistency. There's things that I do every single week to make sure that I'm reinforcing the culture that we have and keeping up with consistent communication patterns. So that might be I got to send our weekly email out or something along those lines. Usually have something that's curiosity related on there. So it might be I got a call with a mentor. I'm doing a deep dive on an athlete's training. I'm just reading a chapter of a book. I think that's incredibly important. I think it's easy as a coach to get caught up in just your day to day and you forget to get better yourself. So having something on there, and then I'll usually have a compassion piece on there of, hey, check in with so and so, because you know that they've been going through an injury or a tough time. Check in with so and so, and I put it on there to make sure that these are the priorities that I have. And then I also get really clear with myself about, hey, if you're playing a stick and ball sport, you're playing hockey or whatever, it's great to be on offense, but sometimes you do have to play defense. I'm a big hockey fan. The biggest thing you got to be able to triage or understand throughout your day is you're going to see a lot of shots. You got to identify which ones are shots on goal that you actually have to do something about, and which ones are shots that are going to miss regardless. And you can kind of let those go. So for me, it's the shots on goal are if an athlete is communicating with me, I'll usually kind of drop what I'm doing and communicate with them. Or if my supervisors or bosses at HOKA are communicating, or someone on my staff. Those are kind of like, those are the only shots on goal that I kind of let in. Otherwise, I'm focused on going on offense and trying to take care of the things that I've listed in my book. And I think having an accountability system where I actually physically check those things off helps ensure that I'm continuing to have a day that aligns with the values that I want to have and creating an environment that aligns with those values. And that's been something that's been, just an ongoing process of being able to make sure that I'm doing that, but kind of framing it around, hey, every day you want to be going on offense and not sitting there being on defense all the time, just responding to emails, responding to text messages, answering this, answering that. You can get stuck doing that. But as anyone who's played a game knows, if you play only defense, the best outcome you can have is a 0-0 tie. You got to go on offense at some point to win a game. And I'm trying to win every single day. And so that involves me going on offense as much as I possibly can.
I haven't heard that before in that way. I have talked about what I would categorize as like offensive versus maybe defensive skills from like a mental game standpoint. Like I think there's some parallels in essence that could go into that, but I think from a leadership standpoint, that's such a great distinction for again how many coaches I know are feeling like they're constantly in goal trying to block shots, right? And again, you're like, I love even just the description of knowing which ones are going to miss, like knowing which ones are not important, if you will, because and letting those go because we can easily start chasing all these things that we think are, but in reality, they're not. And I just know. I even know this from my own life. Like there have been certainly stretches of time where I felt like I was probably more reacting my way through my day. And again, that defense versus no, I'm intentionally, proactively setting up what my wins are for today and how I'm going to live into those. And like, let's make sure that we fill those boxes first. And then again, if there's a leftover time or things like that, then we can play some defense or then we can attend to some other stuff. But I really love that. And the other thing that you in essence brought up for me is when we think about habits, we think about what are the things we should probably intentionally do, and I feel like you go on social media and whatnot, and you're gonna see something new, and you're gonna see all these ideas around, people that are like, all right, this is my morning routine. I saw one the other day, and I thought it was fake, but it was like somebody talking about how they did two separate hour-long meditation sessions in their morning, and they're doing like a workout and ice baths and all this, and I was like, not saying that that's wrong. That's not for me. But again, where I'm getting at is there are the things that are important, and then there's the things that are important not to do. What are some of the things that you feel like you try to be really intentional not to do as a coach to, again, protect your time, your energy, your focus?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I was coaching collegiately, and now I still do to an extent, and this is what's really kind of formulated that offensive mindset, is play way too much defense. And we used to have this kind of motto at the collegiate level that if we received an email from a recruit, that we would respond to every single one. And the trap with that is, yes, you are responding to people who at least have shown some interest in your school, but you're spending a whole bunch of time not going out and actively recruiting the people that you feel are a good fit for your team. And um, I felt like the biggest trap with that is you you respond to those emails, and at the end of the day you're tired and you feel like you did something, but you just played defense. And I remember reading The Score Takes Care of Itself, Bill Walsh's book, the 49ers coach. And one of the things that he said in that book was something to the effect of sharp pencils don't lead to sharp performances. And this is like back in the 80s when you still had to write with like old wooden pencils. And the whole idea was like, yeah, you can get up and go sharpen that pencil a whole bunch of times a day, and it's going to feel like you're doing something, but you're not actually moving the needle as it relates to helping your team perform better. And so if there's something that I'm trying to not do as much anymore, is tasks that aren't helping our athletes be better. And those to me are like, yeah, ignoring the shots that are going wide of the goal. So those are things that I'm really trying not to do. I think in terms of things that I really am trying to do is, again, those things that I have written down in my book, but also you bring up morning routines. I do think it's really important as a coach to remind yourself that you were hired for your mind, your heart, your passion, your energy. And if you're not taking care of yourself, those things tank pretty quickly. And then all of a sudden, your strengths that, the person that hired you thought they were getting, they're not getting that anymore. And the athletes aren't getting that anymore. Um, so I'm very, very disciplined about that for myself. I run every single morning when I wake up. It's the first thing that I do. Lift weights a couple times a week, and don't drink alcohol. Really try to eat healthy and all that kind of stuff, because I just feel like you know the job really is it's just as much of a performer sometimes as it is for an athlete. Like, it is a performance, and you have to put yourself in a position to be able to be the best version of yourself every single day. And I found that when I do that consistently and I take care of myself consistently, those are then the days that I'm able to have the energy to really go on offense, have the kind of the jurisdiction to know when to be on defense, and I feel like I'm more productive and move the needle forward for our team a lot more at the end of the day.
It's kind of incredible to me how we know this as athletes, the importance of taking care of your mind, taking care of, your habits and your bodies and doing all these things. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that we do it, but inherently I think we know that. And yet it's interesting how as those athletes make transitions oftentimes to coaching, all of a sudden now we feel like we're kind of immune, or like, hey, we're bulletproof. Or I'm sometimes careful to use this word, but there almost is this like sense of like martyrdom in coaching, where I am going to give every ounce of me to everybody else around me, and I can't take some time for myself. And yet, we know that if you nurture those things that you described and you fill your own cup, you are also then going to be able to give more, not only in terms of quantity, but also quality to those that you serve. And I think that's really important for you. I think some of this is so rooted too in those values that you talked about. Curiosity for a moment here shapes, I think, the evolution that I'm sure you've had as a coach. Because again, we're kind of learning and hearing what is Jack's current perceptions and beliefs and things like that around coaching. I know I'm sure over time those things have gone through their own form of evolution. So with that, and then I want to get into the development piece in a moment, but like when you reflect back to those early years as a coach, are there things that you've unsubscribed from, or things that you feel like you once believed that you've since, maybe let go of?
I think I'm really trying to get a lot more clear on understanding that I'm going to have success and probably bring the most value to our athletes if I'm in a space where I feel calm, my mind is well rested, well fueled, and I'm ready to go. And that actually, like, if I can do that, protecting that and investing in that is better than maybe a few extra tasks that you could have done. And I think we as coaches maybe have this problem where because we don't get to be between the lines, and I think this is maybe even more of a thing for former athletes, because you don't get to be out there anymore. There's sort of this urge that, well, I'm going to do everything else that I possibly can so that I can feel like I did as much as possible, regardless of the outcome. I think we're always trying to kind of find ways to reckon with outcomes that we can't control. And I think one of the coping mechanisms is just to try to do more, and do more. And what I've really come to realize is, hey, if you're going to be someone that believes in consistency and showing up every single day, that doesn't, what consistency means is that you're not up till the early hours of the morning doing something crazy, because then the next day you're not going to be able to show up in the same way that you did the day before. And so I think for me, if there's something that I've learned, it's that there, if I can be more intentional and more on offense with my days, then I feel a lot more at peace with cutting it off at a certain time of the day than if I just feel like I'm playing defense all day. It's easy to like play defense all day and then get to the end of the day and go, shoot, well, I really wanted to meet with so and so. I really wanted to do this. I really wanted to do that. And I never did it. If you can be doing the things that you want to do throughout the day, I think it's a lot easier. And I think another thing that's helped me a lot is just trying to have bookends for my day. So, so running is kind of my bookend in the morning, and then I have a girlfriend that lives in New York City, and so we talk every night at the same time. And so it's like I have my start and I have my finish, and like everything in the middle of that, like I can use that to be as effective as possible. But once that time is over, then it's time to go to bed and recharge and get ready for the next day. So yeah, I think if there's anything that I've learned, it's that success in coaching and just success in general, I think has a lot more to do with being super intentional with your time and really trying to follow through on that consistency piece so that you can show up the same way every single day instead of, trying to do these marathon film evaluation sessions or whatever it would be in another sport. But yeah, just trying to be the same every day.
I like that. I think there's, again, where I'm kind of coming up, you haven't necessarily, I think, used this exact word, but something that I do talk a lot about is I ask this question a lot. Well, what's your system for that? So when we're talking about anything, whether that's producing results, whether that's developing yourself as a leader, whether that's protecting your well-being, fostering fulfillment, it's like, okay, well, what's your system for that? Where does that show up for you in your calendar? Where does that show up for you in your day? And again, if there's a gap there, then I think you run the risk of somebody else or something else, basically handing those results to you or what, and again, whatever domain or outcomes that we're discussing. So I love the fact that you use those bookends as a system for you to then show up and be the best version of yourself. And again, how that's maybe been nurtured over time. And I think, what I love too about your story is like I know you said like, hey, my background, like I heard this great story about how when you first started coaching, it was not necessarily having come from maybe the traditional competitive running background, but you were like started to run in college and stuff. I think did you run marathon? You ran a few marathons in like a handful, right?
I did, yeah, yeah. You don't know what you don't know when you're just a passionate athlete who doesn't know a whole lot about the sport. But yeah, I did.
I love it. Some are taking finals, some are going to parties, some are running marathons, like I
Yeah.
definitely was not in the latter category. So I love that. And all of this though to say, I know that curiosity is something that you've described having been such a constant, kind of non-negotiable for you along the way. That's certainly shaped who you become today. So for you now, like for you over the last, I'm gonna kind of ask this twofold. One, to get to the point you're at today, what have been maybe the things that you feel like you've learned the most from, or the people that you've learned the most from? And then now, where do you go for continuous learning, here at this given juncture of your career?
I think one of the most important things that's helped me is to have that, for sure, that curiosity, but just a habit of reading. I strictly read nonfiction, much to the chagrin of some of my friends, but I always want to learn when I read, and so reading a lot of books whether that's been training and science related, kind of on the X's and O's of running, but also I love reading biographies of leaders and coaches because I just like to read about the situations that they've encountered and how they've dealt with them. I feel like that's been a real kind of foundational piece for me. And I did have we have a mental performance coach who actually was a former collegiate track and field coach, so kind of understands the different career paths and kind of understands what we're going through. And I was talking to him about maybe a year ago or so, and he had asked, how much I had read in the last year, and it had slipped. I had just started the job here coaching professionally, and there was so much going on that I hadn't given as much time to it. And he just reminded me, he said, like, you used to always post the books you were reading and maybe some excerpts and stuff on social media. He's like, that's how we connected and in the first place. And he's like, I feel like that's kind of what makes you you, is you're always kind of going after learning something new and always kind of keeping your mind open to stuff. And that was a big kind of aha reminder of, hey, like there has to be a space for that in your day. If you truly do value curiosity, there has to be a space for it. And if you're not continuing to expose yourself to new ideas, new information, new ways of handling things, I think it's really easy to stagnate and then again just kind of fall into that defensive pattern that we've talked about so much of just kind of reacting to everything that's happening. And so reading, I think, has been huge for me. I think I've also relied a lot on mentors in this sport. Rob Connor at the University of Portland was incredibly influential in my career. He did three things that I think are super important when it comes to coaching. He's one, authentically himself. He's like a big fan of the band Slayer and was a collector of Portland wrestling memorabilia from the 1970s. And he would always talk about it at practice. And the cool thing is when you have a leader who's not afraid to kind of expose maybe their niche interests, it creates a space for other people to be themselves. And that's where I really kind of got this idea of, hey, the environment that you create at practice is so important because how someone feels about going to practice every single day is going to influence, are they coming early? Are they staying late? Are they getting the most out of themselves? So that was super important. I think the second thing he did was he always would give a bigger seat at the table to the people that demonstrated investment. So some of the really committed upperclassmen he would go to kind of ask, bounce ideas off. Hey, I'm thinking about this for this week. What do you guys think? And I thought that was really cool in terms of kind of, if you're going to work together as a coach and athlete, there has to be a demonstrated investment from both sides. And so I think he did a really good job of that. And then the third thing was just a reminder that you're always kind of at your best when you're having fun. And I get, there's times when it's not quote unquote fun, but if you can remind yourself that, hey, at the end of the day, we're running at a 400-meter circle, or we're running, 26.2 miles down just some city roads, like let's have some fun with this. There's a couple of different ways you can approach it, but it's just let's have some fun. And I really appreciated that. So I've gotten a lot from him. And then I would say, honestly, I've learned a lot from just interactions with coaches and mental performance specialists from other sports. Maybe it's because when you talk to other coaches inside your own sport, they can get a little cagey at times because it's maybe you're sharing competitive information or something like that. My experience has been when you talk to someone from another sport, they're just excited that someone kind of understands what's going on, and they love to have these conversations. And so I feel like there's a lot of benefit for people to, you know, if you're a track coach, like especially if you're on a college campus, go talk to the basketball coach, go talk to the volleyball coach, go talk to the tennis coach. Just figure out, talk about how you talk about systems so much. Like ask them what their system is. Ask them what they value. Ask them how they run a practice, and you might learn something. And so I feel like in this talk already, we've kind of talked about examples from other sports, but I feel like that's been super important for me as well.
Yeah, no, from a personal, selfish perspective, I think that's been one of the joys that I've had in these conversations. Like, there hasn't been one that I haven't taken a new insight or a new thought that I could reflect on, figure out how do I want to make it, my own, or does it align with my own philosophy and things like that. And I think this has been no different in our conversation here. There's a few kind of final things I'd love to ask you, and we'll kind of do some quick hitters here in a moment. But the other question that I wanted to dovetail with this notion of learning is, I know through other conversations that either we've had as well as conversations I've heard from you with others, you've certainly learned a lot too from those that you've worked with, your athletes as well. And so, one thing I'd love to know is if there's been maybe a lesson that you feel like you've learned, particularly a striking one that you've learned from an athlete that's maybe in different ways shifted how you coach or how you lead.
I feel like the athletes are teaching me stuff every single day in a lot of ways, and that's probably coach speak, and people have heard that a lot. Um, but I really mean that in that you're always trying to take some feedback from the athletes and understand how you can coach them better. I think if there's anything that I've maybe learned from the athletes or that I've really come to believe is that you do have to coach to the individual. And that really comes from investing in connection and connecting with them as a human, not just as an athlete, and understanding, each athlete is going to prefer different styles of communication. There's an athlete that I coach who honestly the best way sometimes to coach them is to bust their chops a little bit, give them a hard time, challenge them, because that's the environment that they come from, and they respond well to that. If I were to do that to another couple of athletes that I coach, they would take it personally and think that I was questioning their abilities, right? And so you have to kind of understand, hey, what communication patterns does this athlete respond to? And that's where the art of coaching comes in so much is, man, like a book can maybe teach you how to write a good training plan, but the art of coaching is something that's much more of a learned experience. And you start to learn that every athlete is coming from a different environment, they're coming from a different background, different things in their childhood have been reinforced or not reinforced. And so they're, they're going to take different levels or different amounts of time to develop a trust with you. And then once that trust is built, for some, it's they need to continue to be reminded when they're doing a good job and kind of built up. And others, they kind of need to be brought back down to earth. I feel like if there's anything that the athletes have taught me a lot of times is that you feel sometimes like you're supposed to be the counter in a way. And what I mean by that is like if an athlete's super nervous, like you're not coaching them to also be nervous with them, like that makes it worse. If an athlete is, super down on themselves, you're not hired to be a coach to also be really down on them too, because you're amplifying that. You're making it worse. If an athlete is maybe, really excited and kind of feeling themselves a little too much, continuing to pump them up is not what you were hired for. A lot of times you're kind of trying to bring everyone back to baseline and kind of keep them on the path. And so that's I think what the athletes have taught me is that I think some of my best coaching has come, maybe when I've been able to kind of get an athlete who's maybe straying and going a little too far in one direction in a way that's maybe not good for them and bringing them back. Someone that is a little too nervous, bringing them more to a sense of calm. Maybe someone that's feeling really angry or frustrated about something, bringing someone back to a sense of calm and positivity. And you're kind of always kind of bringing people back to center. And I think I've really just learned that through my experiences with athletes. And I feel like that's a lot of what coaching is yeah, you're not there to kind of amplify their extreme emotions. You're almost there to kind of be the counter.
Did you happen to see there was like a viral, speaking, I know you appreciate college football. Did you see the viral clip that was a few weeks back of the A&M? I think he's the A&M head football coach, Mike Elko. Did you see that by chance? He talked about it's an idea that I think runs very parallel to what you were describing. He described being his job to be the opposite of the moment for his players in essence. And so that was kind of the way he described, hey, if they're frantic, I need to be calm, right? If they're lacking in it, like intensity, I need to bring the energy, I need to bring the intensity and things like that. And so I think it runs well, it's very aligned with what you just described. You are as a coach that counter for your group. One other question I wanted to ask you, before I want to maybe ask some quick hitter ones is there's a process you mentioned like having a notebook and writing down not only what your tasks are, but how you're going to live out your values day to day and things like that. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about what your reflective process is and kind of how you go about what goes into your process for evaluating yourself as a coach? Are there specific questions you're asking yourself? And that could be both in a day-to-day basis, but also in a, on a grander, broader time period too.
Yeah, it goes back to the book that I use. So I have the sort of offensive tasks that are values aligned that I want to achieve at the end of by the end of every day. And then at the end of every day I do an evaluation of that. How well did I do in terms of going on offense today? And specifically, did I lean into the five values that I talk about? Did I have a point of connection? Did I do something to help prepare our athletes for competition? Did I show up in a way that was consistent to what I've been the past however many, days with the athletes? Did I have a moment of curiosity, right? Did I not put a limit on an athlete? Did I try to learn something new? And then did I practice some compassion? And that is very much at the end of the day as I'm tallying up. And it's not, I think it's probably silly and maybe a moot point to like actually give yourself a grade or something like that because it's self-evaluated. But I think having a point of reflection is enough because I think anyone, if you kind of dedicate your days to this values alignment, your conscience will tell you if you're not doing a good job. And so that's been a part of my reflective process. I think the other thing, again, is just to really try to lean into connection as much as possible. And when I'm talking to the athletes and when I'm talking to our staff, it's it's asking, it's, hey, are these values coming across? Like, are these am I doing a good job? And I think that's also been very illuminating. It's something I'd like to dive deeper into because it's a pretty vulnerable space to put yourself in. But hearing the some CEOs and stuff doing like 360-degree reviews, right, and that kind of thing, it's something that I'm pretty interested in. Just to, I think sometimes you maybe think you're doing a good job by your own metrics, but at the end of the day, how well that's translating to the athletes and how well they're embodying that and finding success for themselves is what's A, most important, and B, how, I'm going to be evaluated in the job as well. So it's certainly something that I need to do even better at, that reflective process, but something I'm curious to learn more about how I can do a good job of it.
Beautiful. Okay, I had a few kind of final questions here, and then I'll let you off the hot seat. So we've had you've mentioned a few already, but and then we spoke about this a little bit offline. What's one book or a book that you feel like other coaches, leaders listening could maybe benefit from that has been influential for you?
There's a lot. It's hard. It's hard to would be hard to just pick one. Um, I would say that I guess if I could pick two, maybe that's cheating. Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday. I think that one for me, I liked it maybe because it's very aligned with my values, and so as I was reading it, I was just nodding my head along. I felt like that was it was just a very good book in terms of understanding what it takes to be successful over a long period of time and really finding value in the inputs in the day to day. It's like finding value in that day 1 to 32, rather than just celebrating those 33rd days all the time. So that's been a really good one. I also am a fan of history, and I've really enjoyed Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, all about the Abraham Lincoln presidency and how he hired a lot of his political rivals into his cabinet. And I enjoyed the story for one. I thought it was a really good tale of leadership. I think Abraham Lincoln is one of the greatest leaders the human race has ever seen, in terms of what he was able to achieve and just the amount of pressure he was under, the amount of people who disrespected him, did not look fondly upon him, who kind of wronged him. And through it all, he was very calm and steady through a very turbulent time in American history. And I just think it's a great story. And one of the quotes that always sticks with me from that he said was to always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than anything else. And it's just a really good reminder. If you're an athlete, you're a coach or whatever, that the most important thing is that you kind of resolve to find success in what you do, and that you're going to kind of be relentless in that pursuit. Because there's going to be a whole lot of things that you can't control. But if that is something that's kind of a North Star and is always steady, it might take longer than 33 days, but eventually you're going to start to have some success. And yeah, so I would say those two books.
Love that. There's going to be a fill in the blank portion for this. At the highest level, winning is less about blank and more about blank.
It's a great one. I would say at the highest level, a lot of people would say winning is about talent. I would say winning is less about talent because it's what gets you in the door. And it's more about how you refine and fine tune that talent every single day in practice, so that it can show itself in its best possible way in the heat of competition.
Great. One more fill in the blank, and then one last question. This is what is a myth or the myth about maybe being an elite coach that might hinder them the most is blank. So the myth about being an elite coach that would hinder them the most is blank.
I think maybe it's two-sided. I think the myth is that you shouldn't sleep and, work 24/7. Um, but I think the reality is you got to work incredibly hard, but you have to work way more intentionally. You have to be way more clear about what's important. And I think what's going to serve you best is to identify the values and then thus the tasks align with those values that are going to lead to success for your team, and strictly focus on those things. Everything else is just playing defense against shots that aren't even going in the goal.
Perfect. Last question. I know you've listened to a couple of these, so same question that I try to wrap them all up with. But Jack, what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about?
I struggle with the word proud a lot because I think it makes it about the person who's feeling proud and less about the person they're feeling proud of. So it's a word I've always kind of hesitated to use, I will say. Um, I think, if anything, what brings me so much joy and what I feel like a lot of people don't realize is just how much work our athletes put in to achieve the performances that they have. We had an athlete this year who was finished third at the Chicago Marathon. He ran 2:04:37, which is the fastest time ever run by an athlete who ran in the NCAA. Most of the top marathoners are coming, straight out of East Africa, not going through the NCAA system. And that the consistency of how he showed up every single day, when nobody was watching, on days when it was super cold in Flagstaff, days when the weather was bad, just the way that he showed up with the mental focus and energy that he brought to the start line in Chicago. And because he did that, he was able to perform on the biggest stage. And I guess what I'm just the most proud of are, shoot, the athletes that I coach. Because, like I said at the top of this conversation, they work so hard, and the amount of times that they actually get to show it, it is far, far is disproportionate, I guess, to the amount of work that they put in. And I think if people could really see behind the scenes of, it's not just the 2 hours that you're at practice, it's how you live your entire life, how much sleep you get, how much rest and recovery you get, how you feel your body, all those things, the mental side of it, how you approach it. There's just so many things that are all encompassing, and I'm just really proud of the athletes that we've had and the successes that they've been able to have, and hopefully the performances and accolades that they'll get in the future as well.
Awesome. I love that. Well, again, I want to thank you, Jack, for taking again some time out of your schedule. When in your world, I know that there's no such thing as a quote unquote off season, especially when you have different athletes on different training schedules, as you mentioned at the beginning. So the fact that you took some time today to share and reflect a little bit on some of the things that you've gained. I'm beyond confident that you mentioned at the beginning, hey, I just hope to contribute to this. Like you, I think I most certainly have. And I'm just grateful for the conversation.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Zach.